The National Prosecuting Authority is central to the constitutional enterprise of South Africa. Recently, the Centre for Enterprise and Development has produced a report which in a sense focuses on the NPA, makes a series of very significant criticisms of the performance of the NPA. Whether they're correct or wrong is not the point. The point is the NPA up to the task of enforcing the rule of law and ultimately curbing crime and corruption? That's the question which we pose in this particular program.
I wouldn't manage to miss them in your office if they are in that quantity. The files are there. Some of the issues you are asking about, for example, the extradition of the Guptas and whatever, I got, obviously, even if it's not in detail report, but I got what is the status quo, how far what he has done, what were the challenges. This has created a sense of urgency, not just for the NPA. So I'm glad that we're here. And I really want this to be an opportunity for us to be frank and candid, respectful about challenges, but also with the view to finding solutions. And that for us, we're very grateful, and solutions quickly.
Perhaps there's just two preliminary questions. The first is, I understand, if I could call you, your institution called CED, have produced a whole range of reports. Can I just ask what the purpose of them are before we get on to your one with the NPA?
South Africa's got many crises, many challenges. Where do we start and what should we do? And so we've now released 5 documents. We hope to have 10. And we're focusing on 5 different areas. And the rule of law, which is absolutely central to the future of our country, to economic growth and everything we want to achieve, is one of those big themes. We've chosen 2 catalytic action areas. We can't do everything. The first one was how we appoint our judges and how we can really improve that. And the second is the NPA as a sort of linchpin in the criminal justice system. And essentially we're saying that we can't fix the state unless we stop elites looting the state. So that's why it's an important issue for our whole program.
Can you just give us a sort of 1-minute synopsis about what you're really saying about the NPA, what your core recommendations are?
Yes, I was lucky to have Advocate Helton Cheadle as the co-author of this report with CDE. And essentially we're saying we want to strengthen the NPA. There's an institution that was at the heart of state capture, and when President Ramaphosa appointed a new national director, Advocate Batoy, end of 2018, we and I think many other people had high hopes that the NPA would start to get to grips with the difficult business of investigating and prosecuting the really big masterminds, the big crooks, if you like, behind state capture and looting the state and state institutions, but that we and others have been disappointed. Not that nothing has happened, but we've been disappointed that not enough has happened. And we're calling for a number of practical things to take place quickly. So the intention is not to attack the NPA, but to strengthen it, because our society needs that. And we're saying a few things. Number one, we're saying the president should appoint a retired judge to do an inquiry into the NPA's performance, its structure, its independence, and its leadership. This was an institution that was hollowed out. How much progress has been made? Are the allegations fair or unfair about the NPA? Because that reduces its legitimacy. Let's get to the bottom of things and let's make sure we can get recommendations from a respected senior judge, as was done with, for example, the Nugent Commission. And that's our first recommendation. And we're saying as quickly as possible, within 8 months. And we want an action plan from the president within 3 months of receipt of the report. We're also saying and asking a question as to whether the NPA is getting sufficient support from the executive. For example, the Department of Justice, which is holding on to the Zondo Commission archive, we're saying we really don't understand this. It should be made available to the NPA immediately in its entirety. The National Director, following correct procedure, asked the President to recommend the suspension of a senior director of the NPA in August 2023. Nothing has happened a year later. We're saying we need a decision on this to help the NPA as soon as possible. We're also calling for special corruption courts. The idea is, like the Gauteng High Court has set up, or the Judge President has set up a commercial crimes court, we could have similar corruption courts to speed things up. We know our courts are overloaded at the moment and struggling to deal with their existing caseload. We're saying let's speed up the prosecution and the process of dealing with major criminal corruption cases through special courts, and that the way to expand capacity to do that is to bring in retired judges or acting judges so we don't overload the courts even more, or the judges. So those are some of our recommendations. I think the last one would be, well, two, is that we think the NPA needs more money. 6 billion a year doesn't seem enough to help the country retrieve the enormous sums of money that were stolen and get the right people prosecuted and, if guilty, in jail. And then we're saying that the NPA should give us some idea of a timeline, preferably by the end of the year, on prosecutions arising from at least the Zondo Commission.
So, Advocate Mhaga, I wonder if you could respond to this. I mean, do you accept, I'm assuming you would accept the idea of a recommendation of more money. And I'm sure you would also accept the idea that, you know, there should be greater support given to the NPA by the executive. But I'm intrigued by the fact that the fundamental proposition which underscores this report is, quite frankly, that the NPA has not performed to the extent that it's gained, as it were, a widespread legitimacy on the part of the public in the way perhaps the South African Revenue Service, which was also the subject of state capture, has done subsequent to the leadership of Mr. Kieswetter. How do you respond to that?
Judge, first of all, we as the NPA appreciate and understand and welcome the inputs that are made by any organization that has an interest in strengthening the NPA's prosecutorial capacity, in upholding the rule of law and obviously holding those responsible for state capture and crime in general accountable. But what is quite disheartening with the findings of the report and the publishing thereof is that the NPA has not been given an opportunity to be heard. No response has been requested for the NPA from all these allegations that have been made in the report before it was published. You would expect that when it was compiled, it would be conducted. Secondly, before it's being published, we are shown the interim findings to respond thereto. That did not happen. That's besides the point.
I think it is beside the point. Carry on.
We agree that we welcome the recommendation insofar as more money for the NPA. But when you look at the report on performance and the leadership of Advocate Batoyi, one would think that this is an NPA 9 years ago. Because with Advocate Batoyi at the helm, she has managed to stabilize that institution by appointing people in key leadership positions in the form of Advocate Rodney Dikok, Omar Abachi for AFU, Anton du Plessis for strategy, and DPP offices in Mpumalanga and Northwest to ensure that there's a stability at a leadership level. Now, this is an organization that in the past 5 years, 700 government officials have been convicted of corruption. 1,000 private companies have been convicted of corruption. Recently, the president made permanent the Investigative Directorate Against Corruption. And we're looking at a criminal investigative capacity that has been provided to the IDEC, which means now the skills of investigating criminals in state capture have been boosted or enhanced. Now we're looking at an organization where recently we have the first Steenhoff conviction. And this has been a matter that has been at the forefront of corruption, and albeit couched differently than your normal corruption or fraud. But of importance is the fact that we are sitting at 14 billion restraint orders from AFU through state capture, and 11 billion has been recovered from state capture. But the focus of my colleague is on high-profile cases, forgetting that there's general prosecutions where organized crime conviction rate is sitting at 93.4%, with gender-based violence and femicide sitting at 91.7%, and commercial crimes cases sitting at 93%.
Yes,
but even if we were to zoom in on prosecution in state capture, we are sitting at 115 authorized investigations, 37 matters enrolled, 208 accused persons, including entities that are 67 that are appearing before the court.
All right, sorry, Advocate, I've got to stop you here because you've said a lot already. Given you a chance, I want to interrogate some of this. The first proposition is that Advocate Batoy has been in for 6 years, not 2 minutes. The real question which you've got to ask over the 6 years is, tell me one prominent politician, tell me one person who was implicated in the Zondo Commission, serious politician, who's even been indicted.
Remember,
and I don't
Judge,
think we have to waste much time on it. The answer is none.
We accept that there's slow pace of prosecution in state capture cases.
Well, don't you think that?
You must understand
don't you understand?
That these are
don't you understand?
Remember, Judge, give me a chance.
I'm giving you a chance.
I have considered that there's slow progress in state capture cases. But what makes this slow progress is the fact that we were not given a blueprint for prosecution ready or trial ready cases. We were given pointers that required investigations with an ID that had people that were on contract, because it was not a permanent structure. Right. It is only in April that was made permanent. It was only in April where we had criminal investigative capacity.
Let me shift the focus. Isn't it extraordinary that the forensic journalists are able to find out all stuff about VBS, and we're still faffing around in relation to very prominent people who clearly implicated there, who clearly could be charged, and you've done nothing so far?
Some will say these were plea and sentence agreements, but you only plead guilty when we have a formidable case that is you are confronted.
Well, you know what is very interesting?
That is why those people pleaded guilty.
What is very interesting is if you take Steinhoff, one of the reasons why you're successful or becoming successful in Steinhoff, because you've used the private sector, the private bar. The real question, Advocate, is have you got enough competent people at the senior ranks to prosecute these very complex cases? My sources within the NPA tell me you do, but they're all retiring within 2 or 3 years, and you haven't got a succession plan.
If you talk about us using private counsel in these matters, in VBS, none of those were used. It is an advocate within the NPA. Yes, we are enhancing our prosecutorial capacity by using Section 838 appointments. Yeah. That has been the trend since inception of the NPA, and there's nothing untoward to that.
No, of course there isn't. I agree with that. Thank you. I need to take a break, and then I want to put a series of questions, so some of your responses to Ann Bernstein.
Can I?
No, after the break.
At Pick n Pay Hypermarket, for a limited time, get unlimited savings. Smart shoppers get assorted 1.5-litre Coca-Cola Light or